Welcome to History for Sleep, where the stories of our world unfold as you drift into dreams. Tonight, let the ancient past guide your imagination, from forgotten kingdoms to mysteries buried beneath the sands of time. Before your eyelids grow heavy, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, so the next time you can fall asleep to another story from the ages. Now, close your eyes, let history become your lullaby. And as you drift away, let's get into the video. The question that refuses to die. If there is one ancient story that has ignited more debate, more speculation, and more cross-cultural comparison than almost any other in the ancient Near East, it is the story of the Tower of Babel. A tale only 9 verses long in the book of Genesis somehow opened the door to thousands of years of theories. Scholars debate its historical root, theologians debate its theological purpose, linguists debate its implications for early human communication, and alternative history researchers argue that it contains a clue to a mystery far older than the Bible itself. But today, in this documentary, we are not simply repeating the story. We are doing something different. We are asking questions, many questions, and examining ideas instead of declaring any single narrative absolute. And the core question that frames this entire discussion is simple. Was the Tower of Babel built as an attempt to reach the Anunnaki, the gods who, according to Sumerian texts, resided in the heavens? To even begin discussing that question, we must first ask, what exactly is the story of the Tower of Babel, stripped down to its core? What details does the Bible give, and what details does it not give? Why did ancient Jewish, Mesopotamian, and later Christian writers all expand the story in their own ways? And why do parallels appear in Sumerian narratives that predate Genesis by more than 1,000 years? These are the discussions that Part 1 will explore. Not conclusions, discussions. 1. Setting the stage. What do we actually know? The story of the Tower of Babel appears in Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9. It is striking for its brevity. There is no detailed architectural description. No measurements. No mention of kings, empires, or dates. This is already unusual because most ancient Near Eastern texts, including the Sumerian ones, provide extremely detailed descriptions of temples, towers, and cities. So why is Genesis so short? Is it simply summarizing a story that was already widely known? Or is the brevity intentional, designed to highlight the theological message more than the historical event? These questions form the background of the discussion. But the major elements of the story are these. Humanity originally shared one language. People migrated eastward and settled in a region called Shinar, understood as Mesopotamia. They planned to build a tower with its top in the heavens. God intervened, confused their language, and scattered them across the earth. The unfinished city became known as Babel, connected to the Hebrew root word for confusion. This is the traditional, biblical outline. But as we start to unpack it, one detail demands exploration. What did the phrase "with its top in the heavens" mean to the ancient writers? Was it a poetic expression? A literal attempt at building a skyscraper? A metaphor for rebellion? Or, as some researchers propose, was it a reference to an attempt to reach beings who were believed to live or travel in the sky? This is where the concept of the Anunnaki enters the discussion. 2. Introducing the Anunnaki. Who were they according to Mesopotamian texts? Before we connect Babel to the Anunnaki, we need clarity. Who were the Anunnaki really in the oldest known descriptions? The word Anunnaki appears in Sumerian and Akkadian writings. Depending on the time period and city, the Anunnaki can mean a group of high-ranking gods, descendants of the chief gods, such as Anu, judges of the underworld, astral or heavenly beings connected with the sky and stars. But they were never described in one unified way. Different Sumerian cities told different versions of their mythos. Yet one theme is consistent. They were considered powerful beings connected to the heavens. That term, the heavens, in Mesopotamian writing is also flexible. It can mean the physical sky, a realm where the gods dwell, the seat of divine authority, a metaphor for something beyond the reach of mortals. Already we notice a conceptual overlap between the Genesis narrative and the Mesopotamian worldview. the idea that the heavens are the domain of divine beings. So the question becomes, if the Tower of Babel was built in ancient Mesopotamia, the land of the Anunnaki, why does the Bible describe humans building a tower with its top in the heavens? Were they trying to reach God? Or were they trying to reach the gods they believed to be in the sky, the same beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki? This is not a claim. This is a question. A question worth examining. 3. Shinar and the world of ancient Mesopotamia. If we want to understand the Tower of Babel, we must understand the setting, Shinar. The Bible names it plainly, and historians generally interpret Shinar as the region of southern Mesopotamia, the area where Sumer, Akkad, and later Babylon emerged. This is significant because Mesopotamia is the birthplace of ziggurats, giant step towers, the earliest known writing systems, the earliest known city-states, myths about the Anunnaki, myths about ascensions, descents, and divine communications between heaven and earth. So when Genesis mentions a tower built in Shinar, it's entering a cultural landscape already filled with stories of humans building structures to connect with divine realms. But here is the key question. Were ziggurats designed to allow humans to reach the gods? Or were they symbolic mountains, models of cosmic order, not intended for physical ascension? Most archaeologists argue the latter, that ziggurats were temples, not stairways to heaven. But ancient traditions from Mesopotamia often portray these structures as meeting points between humans and gods, places where divine beings could descend or communicate. If the people of Babel were familiar with Sumerian beliefs, could they have been trying to create the ultimate meeting point between humans and sky-dwelling beings? Again, we are not concluding. We are exploring. 4. Let us make a name. What were they really trying to achieve? Genesis 11 verse 4 records the builder's motivation. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. This statement raises multiple questions. 1. Why did they fear being scattered? Were they already aware of previous divine judgments, such as the flood? Were they afraid of losing unity? Or were they attempting to create a centralized power, possibly under a ruler like Nimrod, mentioned in Genesis 10? 2. What does make a name mean? In the ancient world, this could mean one of several things. Establishing greatness and reputation. Building a monument to the gods. Gaining divine favor. Attaining something forbidden or dangerous. Some traditions claim that the builders were trying to avoid another flood by reaching higher ground. Others suggest they wanted to ascend into heaven itself. Still others propose that they sought to challenge divine authority. But a newer question surfaces in our discussion. Could to make a name for ourselves imply that they wanted to rise to the level of the heavenly beings, the Anunnaki? Did they believe these beings had knowledge, authority, or technology that they could obtain by reaching the sky? Did they want to enter the realm of the gods? Or perhaps imitate the gods by creating a structure that rivaled divine architecture described in Sumerian texts? These are possibilities worth asking, not declaring. 5. What did heaven mean to ancient civilizations? One of the biggest misunderstandings in modern readings of ancient texts is the assumption that ancient people used words the way we do. When we hear the word heaven, we often imagine either a spiritual realm beyond physical reality, or outer space. Ancient Mesopotamians did not neatly separate these ideas. For them, the sky was the realm where birds fly, the realm of stars and planets, the dwelling of gods, a place that divine beings could descend from or ascend to. Occasionally a metaphor for unreachable heights. So when the builders of Babel said they wanted to build a tower with its top in the heavens, did they mean, we want to reach the literal sky? We want to reach the realm of the gods? We want to symbolize our connection to the divine? Or we want to access whatever power or knowledge the sky beings possess? Different scholars interpret it differently. But all interpretations recognize that the heavens were associated with divine beings, whether we call them God, gods, or the Anunnaki. This conceptual overlap is important for our overall discussion. 6. Why does God intervene in the story? the central turning point of the Babel narrative is divine intervention. God descends, observes the project, and decides to stop the construction by confusing the languages. This raises more questions. 1. Why was the tower a threat? If it was just a tall building, why intervene? 2. What did God mean by nothing will be impossible for them? Does this suggest human potential was expanding dangerously? Does it imply they were accessing forbidden knowledge? 3. Was the issue the height of the tower, or the unity of the people? Some scholars say the problem was pride. Others say it was disobedience to God's command to spread across the earth. Still others claim it was humanity's attempt to reach the divine realm. But in an alternative history discussion, another question emerges. Did God intervene because humans were attempting to interact with divine entities associated with the sky, entities the Bible consistently warns against? Could the Tower of Babel have been an attempt to bridge the gap between humans and beings like the Anunnaki? And did divine intervention occur to prevent a repeat of events like Genesis 6, where the sons of God, interpreted by some as divine or semi-divine beings, interacted with humans? We are not claiming this. We are simply acknowledging the possibility that ancient writers framed the story within a broader context of human-divine boundary crossing. 7. Why does the Babel story appear so early in the Bible? An often overlooked detail is that the Babel story appears early in Genesis, before Abram appears on the scene. This placement raises questions. Was the story meant to explain why humanity became divided before the rise of Israel? Or was it referencing a much older Mesopotamian tradition, one that predates the biblical patriarchs? Was it a theological response to Sumerian stories of gods descending and interacting with humans? Some researchers suggest that Genesis 11 is intentionally placed at the end of what scholars call primeval history, a section filled with universal stories about humanity's origins, including the flood and Eden. These chapters often echo or reinterpret stories from earlier Mesopotamian cultures. If Babel is part of that reinterpretation, what earlier story could it be engaging with? Could there have been a Sumerian tale about humans building a great tower to reach the gods, a tale that the Hebrews recast in their own theological narrative? We explore these possibilities not to dismiss scripture but to understand the literary, cultural, and historical environment in which the story was written. 8. The question that guides this documentary. Part 1 is about opening the discussion, not closing it. So let's summarize the central questions that will guide the remaining 10 parts. Was the Tower of Babel inspired by, connected to, or reacting to Sumerian structures like ziggurats? What is the historical evidence linking the Babel story to real Mesopotamian sites? What did ancient people believe about the Anunnaki, and how might that belief have influenced the builders' motivations? Did ancient humans attempt to reach or communicate with gods dwelling in the sky? Why did divine intervention occur, and what does that imply about human ambition? How do Sumerian, Babylonian, and Hebrew texts interact in shaping the narrative? Is there any archaeological evidence supporting the idea of an enormous tower project that was abruptly halted? These are not questions with simple answers. They require slow, careful examination, and that is exactly what this 22,000-word documentary will provide. Mesopotamia, the land of towers, gods, and ancient ambition. If Part 1 introduced the core question, whether the Tower of Babel was intended to reach the Anunnaki, Part 2 now turns our attention to the physical world in which the story unfolded, ancient Mesopotamia. Understanding this region is essential, because every piece of the puzzle, the tower, the migration of people, the idea of reaching the heavens, and the presence of the Anunnaki, is rooted here. And when we begin to examine Mesopotamia carefully, something becomes clear. This land was obsessed with towers, gods, and the sky long before the Tower of Babel ever entered the biblical narrative. But why? What drove these ancient civilizations to look upward, toward the heavens, the stars, the realm of the divine? Let's explore these questions step by step. 1. Mesopotamia, a land defined by its geography. To understand the motivations of ancient peoples, we begin with their environment. Mesopotamia, literally the land between the rivers, lay between the Tigris and the Euphrates. This region produced the world's first cities, the earliest known writing, The earliest priest-kings. The earliest monumental architecture. The earliest complex religious systems. But it also produced something else. The earliest attempts to bridge Earth and the heavens. Why Mesopotamia? Because geography shaped worldview. The land was flat, unlike Egypt with its protective deserts and narrow Nile Valley. Mesopotamia was exposed, vulnerable, and unpredictable. Floods, droughts, wars, and invasions created a society constantly seeking cosmic reassurance. The sky became both a place of hope and danger. Comets, eclipses, and planetary movements were treated as divine signs. This environment made people look upward. Not metaphorically, literally. And from this upward gaze emerged the idea that the gods, including the Anunnaki, resided in the heavens, and that humans must build structures to reach them, honor them, or attract their attention. Which leads us to a question central to our entire documentary. Did the physical landscape of Mesopotamia inspire its people to attempt to reach sky-dwelling beings through architecture? It is a question worth holding as we move forward. 2. Ziggurats, the mountains humans built. Before the Tower of Babel, there were ziggurats. In fact, archaeological evidence shows that ziggurats existed long before the biblical period in which the Babel story is set. But what exactly were these structures? A ziggurat was a massive, terraced platform, a stepped structure consisting of a broad rectangular base, several upward levels, a temple at the top. But the key point is that ziggurats were not temples themselves. They were platforms meant to elevate temples closer to the divine realm. This raises an important discussion. Were ziggurats simply temple mounds? Or were they believed to be literal stairways to heaven, a means for divine beings like the Anunnaki to descend from the sky and interact with humans? Different scholars offer different interpretations. But what we know from Mesopotamian texts is that ziggurats were often described as meeting places between humans and gods, cosmic mountains connecting Earth and the heavens, channels for divine descent, symbols of divine authority. One of the most famous examples is the Anunnaki ziggurat of Babylon, often associated with the Tower of Babel by later Jewish and Christian writers. Its name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This is an extraordinary phrase, and one that cannot be ignored in our discussion. Why would ancient builders name their structure in a way that connects heaven and earth? Were they attempting to bring divine beings down, or to ascend to them? The answer is not simple. But the question sits at the heart of our exploration into whether the Tower of Babel was meant to reach the Anunnaki. 3. The Anunnaki and the sky. What did ancient people believe? To understand why humans might attempt to reach the heavens, we must understand how ancient people viewed the gods. In Sumerian tradition, the Anunnaki were the offspring of An, the sky god, judges of the world, beings associated with stars and constellations, beings capable of ascending and descending. Some texts describe An, Enlil, and other gods as traveling between heaven and earth, often using gateways or bond heavens. This raises the inevitable question. Did Mesopotamian people believe that the divine beings truly lived physically in the sky, in a place reachable through height? Or did they consider the heavens symbolic? The evidence suggests a mixture of both. The skies were viewed as a real, tangible space where gods operated. Stars were not just celestial objects, they were interpreted as divine presences. The Anunnaki were thought to influence fertility, kingship, destiny, war, weather, all from their heavenly positions. So when humans built ziggurats, were they symbolically ascending? Or were they attempting to create a landing place for the gods? Again, we ask, not conclude. 4. The political side of ancient architecture. There is another dimension to consider when discussing structures like ziggurats and the Tower of Babel: politics. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings were viewed as intermediaries between humans and gods. Architecture was used to demonstrate both earthly and divine authority. Taller structures implied greater closeness to the gods. A powerful city needed a powerful temple tower. This raises an interesting question. Was the Tower of Babel simply a political project, a demonstration of power? Or was it something else? Consider this: building a structure with its top in the heavens would have been seen as not only a spiritual act but a political statement. It announced the city's dominance, its wealth, its unity, and its spiritual superiority. In this sense, the Tower of Babel may have been a massive national project, an attempt to build a center of power and identity. But political interpretations do not exclude the possibility of religious motivations. In fact, in Mesopotamia, politics and religion were deeply intertwined. A towering structure reaching toward the sky could be simultaneously a political symbol, a religious temple, an astronomical observatory, a cosmic gateway, or an attempt to establish direct contact with heavenly beings. Which of these aligned most closely with the intentions behind Babel? Our documentary will keep this question open as we examine more evidence. 5. Why height mattered: the human desire to ascend. Height, in ancient cultures, was not merely architectural. It was symbolic of closeness to the divine, power, immortality, knowledge. Whether in Egypt, Mesoamerica, or Mesopotamia, we see massive structures reaching skyward. Why? Why did ancient humans repeatedly try to reach the heavens? One discussion in anthropology suggests that human societies often express their highest values through vertical architecture. Another viewpoint is more mythological. Many ancient cultures describe heavenly beings descending to earth, sometimes teaching humans, sometimes ruling them, sometimes interacting with them in ways that blur the boundary between divine and human. If ancient people believed divine beings came down, it's reasonable to ask: did they also believe humans could go up, through ritual, architecture, or divine invitation? This question brings us closer to the heart of the Anunnaki theory. Sumerian texts like the Enuma Elish, the Descent of Inanna, and the myth of Etana all describe ascensions and descensions. In some stories, humans ascend through the sky with divine assistance. This is profoundly relevant to the Tower of Babel discussion. If the concept of ascending to the heavens existed long before Genesis was written, then the Tower of Babel could be seen as an extension of this older belief system. And if the Anunnaki were believed to dwell in the sky, did the builders of Babel see themselves as climbing toward their realm, not simply the realm of the biblical God? An intriguing question indeed. 6. The innovation of brick and bitumen. Genesis 11 makes a curious architectural note. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks, and let us use bitumen for mortar." Why does the text mention this? Why does it matter? Because this detail situates the story firmly in southern Mesopotamia, a region where stone was scarce and mud brick construction dominated. But it also introduces a symbolic layer. Brick technology in Mesopotamia represented unity, advancement, and ambition. When a community mastered kill-fired brick and waterproof bitumen, it could build higher, stronger, longer-lasting structures. This technological shift enabled the construction of ziggurats towering above flat landscapes. So when Genesis describes unified brickmaking at Babel, it is describing a society on the brink of major architectural advancement, a society capable of building something unprecedented. And this leads to the next question. Did the Bible include this detail to emphasize that humanity was advancing to a point where the boundary between human and divine realms felt dangerously thin? Some scholars argue yes. Others argue that the detail is purely historical. But in our documentary, we allow the question to remain open. 7. The psychological drive toward heaven. Architecture aside, there is a psychological dimension to this story. Every ancient culture expressed a desire to reach the heavens. But why? The heavens represented control over destiny, access to divine knowledge, transcendence, immortality. In Sumerian traditions, the Anunnaki were often described as holding the tablets of destiny, controlling fate itself. Imagine living in a world where famine, flood, and war could strike at any moment, and believing that powerful sky beings controlled everything. Would you not want to reach them? Appeal to them? Question them? Join them? Could the Tower of Babel be an expression of humanity's desire to reach the level of the gods, to ascend and gain knowledge that had been denied to them? This interpretation echoes the story of Eden. In Genesis 3, humans reach for forbidden knowledge. In Genesis 11, humans reach for the heavens. Is there a thematic pattern? A recurring tension between divine boundaries and human ambition? This is another thread our documentary will examine. 8. The Anunnaki and the question of forbidden knowledge. Many alternative history interpretations propose that interactions between humans and divine beings in antiquity involved advanced knowledge, astronomical, agricultural, architectural, or otherwise. According to this view, ancient humans may have attempted to regain or replicate lost knowledge through structures like Babel. If humans believed the Anunnaki possessed secret knowledge, advanced wisdom, celestial power, then the Tower of Babel might represent an attempt to access that knowledge once again. But this is only one interpretation. Others argue that Babel represents the opposite, a rejection of the Anunnaki concept and a theological affirmation that only God rules the heavens. The tension between these interpretations is what makes the story so enduring. It refuses to settle into one explanation. 9. Bringing it all together, why the sky was everything. In summary, Part 2 presents this central discussion. Mesopotamia was a culture defined by upward ambition, architecturally, religiously, politically, and symbolically. Its people viewed the sky as the realm of powerful beings. Its architecture rose toward the heavens. Its myths described divine descent and ascent. Its political systems used height to assert dominance. Its religious worldview saw mountains, towers, and stars as bridges to the divine. So when we read about the Tower of Babel, we are not looking at an isolated story. We are looking at the culmination of thousands of years of sky-oriented belief. The real question becomes: was the Tower of Babel merely a symbolic gesture, a political project, or a religious monument? Or was it part of a larger, ancient attempt to bridge humanity with beings believed to live in the heavens, including, possibly, the Anunnaki? This question will guide us as we now move toward Part 3, where we will explore the historical and archaeological evidence behind ancient towers in Mesopotamia, and whether any of them could be the real Tower of Babel. Searching for the tower, archaeology, ruins, and the hunt for Babel. In Parts 1 and 2, we explored the worldview, geography, and spiritual ambitions that shaped the Tower of Babel story. Now in Part 3, we move from ideas to evidence, the physical remains of ancient Mesopotamia that might hold clues about the real tower behind the biblical account. Yet before diving into ruins, we must acknowledge something crucial. No structure in history has been more searched for, more debated, or more symbolically powerful than the Tower of Babel, yet its physical identity remains uncertain. This uncertainty has inspired centuries of scholarly excavation, theological speculation, and alternative history debate. Some researchers claim the Tower of Babel must have been a real structure. Others argue it was symbolic. And still others propose it was one of the massive ziggurats that once dominated Mesopotamian skylines. But which one? And how do we even begin to identify it? That is the heart of Part 3. The archaeological investigation. 1. Was the Tower of Babel a real physical structure? Before we examine ruins, we must address the question: did the Tower of Babel physically exist? There are three major viewpoints. Viewpoint 1: the tower was a real structure that later crumbled. This view is held by many historians who argue that the story is based on an actual construction project, likely a massive ziggurat. Many ancient cities built enormous towers, some reaching 90 meters, 300 feet, tall. But time, war, erosion, and neglect have destroyed most of these. So the physical remains of Babel could simply be lost. Viewpoint 2: the tower was symbolic, not literal. Some scholars argue that the story reflects theological themes rather than a single historic tower. They compare it to other ancient narratives that explain the diversity of human languages. But even these scholars often admit that the symbolism likely came from real structures people knew. Viewpoint 3: the tower was a real structure connected to ancient mythology and possible divine interaction. This is the view explored in alternative history discussions. It suggests that humans might have built a tower to reach or communicate with beings believed to inhabit the heavens, possibly including the Anunnaki, who, according to Sumerian texts, descended from the sky. While this view is not endorsed by mainstream academia, it raises questions worth examining, especially since Mesopotamian myths frequently mentioned gods descending on mountain-like structures. Regardless of viewpoint, nearly all scholars agree on one thing. If the Tower of Babel existed, it would almost certainly have been a ziggurat. So our journey begins there. 2. Ziggurats, clues carved in mud brick. Archaeologists have identified dozens of ziggurats across ancient Mesopotamia. Many are only piles of dirt today, but their foundations survive. The most famous candidates for the Tower of Babel include Etemenanki, Babylon; the Ziggurat of Eridu; the Ziggurat of Ur. Akkadian temple towers predating all of the above. To determine whether any of these might be the biblical tower, we must examine what archaeology tells us and what it doesn't. 3. Candidate number 1, Etemenanki, the most popular theory. Most historians identify the Tower of Babel with Etemenanki, the great ziggurat dedicated to the god Marduk in the city of Babylon. Why? Reason 1, the name itself. Etemenanki means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This title alone raises questions. Why heaven? Why foundation? Why was Babylon obsessed with bridging heaven and earth? The name aligns remarkably well with Genesis' description of a tower with its top in the heavens. Reason 2, the size. Ancient sources like Herodotus describe Etemenanki as one of the largest structures ever built in antiquity. At its peak, it may have stood 90 meters tall, 300 feet high, with a base almost 90 meters by 90 meters. No other ziggurat known from archaeology reaches this height. If ancient people were trying to build a tower that touched the heavens, whether figuratively or literally, Etemenanki is the strongest candidate. Reason 3, Babylon's reputation. Babylon was a city deeply associated with pride, rebellion, kingship, and divine human interaction. Later Jewish writings often linked Babylon with arrogance and defiance. This makes it a fitting backdrop for a story where humanity challenges divine boundaries. But problems exist. However, the identification is not perfect. Etemenanki was built in stages over many centuries. It was rebuilt after floods. It was reconstructed by Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE, long after the time of Nimrod or early Genesis events. So while this tower fits the description, it may not be old enough. Unless, of course, there was an earlier version, one lost to history and later rebuilt. And some archaeologists believe exactly that. 4. Candidate number 2, the Ziggurat of Eridu, the oldest sacred city. Eridu is one of the oldest known cities on Earth, so old that Sumerian kings listed it as the first city ever created by the gods. This deserves attention. Why? Because according to the Sumerian king list, kingship itself descended from heaven first in Eridu, not in Babylon, Ur, or Akkad. This makes Eridu a deeply spiritual and symbolic city. And its ziggurat was incredibly ancient, predating Babylon's by more than 1,000 years. Reason 1, Eridu's mythological importance. Eridu was the city of the god Enki, one of the most important Anunnaki. He was associated with wisdom, creation, secret knowledge, the abyss, civilization. If any city would have attempted to reach the divine realm, Eridu is a prime candidate. Reason 2, the tower in Eridu was enormous for its time. Archaeological layers show that Eridu's temple mound grew over centuries, from a simple shrine to a large stepped platform. Some researchers believe that the earliest prototypes of ziggurats began here. Could the Tower of Babel have been based on an extremely ancient structure from Eridu, one already legendary by the time Genesis was written? This remains open for discussion. 5. Candidate number 3, the Ziggurat of Ur, a symbol of heaven and earth. The ziggurat at Ur is one of the best preserved in Mesopotamia. Although not as tall as Etemenanki, it was monumental for its era. Why include it as a candidate? Reason 1. Ur was a major cultural center. Ur produced kings, priests, scribes, and astronomical knowledge. Its towers symbolized a connection between humanity and the heavens. Reason 2. Abraham came from Ur. Genesis places Abram's origins in Ur of the Chaldeans. This connects the early biblical narrative to this exact geographical region. If stories from generations earlier were preserved, the Tower of Babel might have been known to Abraham's ancestors. Could the ziggurat of Ur have influenced later biblical writers? Could cultural memory have merged stories about Ur's tower with older traditions from Babel? These are possibilities worth exploring, not certainties. 6. Earlier, lost towers, the forgotten structures of pre-city Mesopotamia. The deeper archaeologists dig, the older the towers become. Pre-Sumerian cultures, such as the Ubaid and Uruk periods, show signs of early monumental architecture. Some of these structures predate writing, predate formal religion, predate Sumerian mythology altogether. This raises a powerful question. Could the Tower of Babel have been based on a structure so ancient that later civilizations only remembered it faintly, as a myth? If early tower building practices existed before writing, then Genesis might be referencing a memory older than any preserved text. And if the earliest human civilizations interacted with or believed they interacted with sky beings, as some ancient myths suggest, then perhaps the Tower of Babel reflects a very ancient ambition to reach the realm of the gods. Including, potentially, the Anunnaki. 7. The archaeological silence, why so little remains? One reason the Tower of Babel has not been definitively identified is simple. Mesopotamian buildings were made of mud brick. Mud brick does not survive millennia without maintenance. Egypt built with stone, hence the pyramids. Mesopotamia built with clay, hence the ruins. This means ziggurats crumble, foundations erode, walls collapse, cities vanish beneath sand and silt. So the physical absence of a definitive tower does not prove it never existed. In fact, it is remarkable that any ziggurats survive at all. 8. Excavations in Babylon, strange clues, missing pieces. When German archaeologist Robert Coldway excavated Babylon in the early 1900s, he found massive foundations, a square base consistent with a huge tower, inscriptions from Nebuchadnezzar describing reconstruction of an ancient tower. One inscription even says, "I completed Etemenanki, the Tower of Babel, which previous kings had tried to rebuild but failed." This single inscription has sparked more debate than perhaps any other archaeological discovery related to the Tower of Babel. Why? Because it implies the tower predated Nebuchadnezzar. Earlier kings attempted to rebuild it. It may have been ancient even in the 6th century BCE. This opens the door to the possibility that the original Tower of Babel was centuries older than Babylon's reconstruction. 9. Could the Tower of Babel be a composite memory? An important discussion in archaeology is the idea of composite memory, when legends merge multiple historical events into one story. Could the Tower of Babel be part Etemenanki, part Eridu, part Ur, part very ancient structures long forgotten, part theological interpretation, part cultural memory of sky-oriented belief, and possibly part recollection of older myths about divine-human interaction? It is entirely possible. This does not weaken the story. It makes it more complex and more intriguing. 10. The Anunnaki and the search for the tower. Now, we return to our overarching question. Was the Tower of Babel built to reach the Anunnaki? Archaeology itself cannot answer this directly. It cannot identify the intentions of ancient builders. But what archaeology does show us is this. Mesopotamian cities built towers specifically for divine descent. These towers were designed as gateways between humans and gods. The gods in question, the Anunnaki, were believed to dwell in the sky. Some ziggurats carried names explicitly referencing heaven. Ancient kings claimed to restore earlier, more powerful towers. These towers often rose in the same region named Shinar in Genesis. The concept of reaching the heavens was central to Mesopotamian cosmology. So while archaeology cannot confirm the purpose of the Tower of Babel, it strongly supports the idea that people in this region, at this time, did indeed build towers intended to connect with sky beings. Whether we call those beings gods, messengers, or Anunnaki is part of the ongoing discussion. Languages, power, and the puzzle of divine intervention. If the Tower of Babel story is one of the most mysterious episodes in ancient scripture, then the sudden fragmentation of human language is perhaps its most haunting moment. It reads almost like a spiritual earthquake, silent, but devastating, disorienting, and irreversible. And yet, even within this dramatic account, there is a lingering question that continues to challenge historians, linguists, theologians, and Sumerian researchers alike: what exactly happened at Babel, and why did it revolve around language? Was the confusion of tongues a supernatural act meant to dismantle human ambition? Or was it a historical marker of something deeper, political, cultural, or even technological, that we still do not fully understand? And when scholars propose that the event may have had some connection to the Anunnaki, the ancient watchers, or advanced gods of Sumer, does that interpretation raise new possibilities about the origin of human languages themselves? These questions form the heart of this fourth installment, where we continue our search for meaning behind the Tower of Babel, not by declaring conclusions, but by examining the evidence, contradictions, and theories that surround this ancient divide. The sudden shattering of one language. The biblical account is short but powerful. In Genesis 11, humanity shares one language and one speech. This unity is not merely linguistic, it represents shared thought, shared purpose, and an unbroken chain of understanding. The people speak as one, plan as one, and build as one. But then, the text abruptly introduces a rupture. Confusion, dispersal, and division. This raises several questions. How literal is the narrative? Is it describing the birth of global language diversity? Or does it symbolize something more specific, like the collapse of a political empire, the end of a cultural unity, or the interference of a higher power with human ambitions? Many ancient cultures describe a golden age where humanity communicated effortlessly, often implying that language was once far simpler than it is today. Is this merely poetic nostalgia, or could it reflect a distant memory of a time when human groups shared a more unified linguistic root? Were ancient languages more unified than we think? Modern linguistics suggests that all languages may be traced to a handful of proto-languages. Some researchers go further, theorizing a proto-world language, a single ancestral human tongue. While this idea remains controversial, the Tower of Babel narrative seems to mirror that possibility. This naturally leads to a deeper inquiry. If humanity once had one language, who taught it to them? This is where Sumerian mythology and biblical interpretation intersect in fascinating ways. In the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are described as gods who gave order, appointed duties, and occasionally bestowed gifts of knowledge. Language, being the foundation of civilization, would logically fit within such a category. Did ancient cultures believe that language came from the gods because it was simply too complex to emerge by accident? Or did they believe this because early rulers and priest-kings established languages for administrative and religious control? The debate remains open. Language as a tool of power. When we look at empires throughout history, the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptian dynasties, Roman rule, we repeatedly see language used as a critical tool for both unity and domination. So, we must ask, was the Babel story reflecting a real ancient event where a single ruling power tried to enforce one universal language? Did this attempt fail, leading later storytellers to frame the collapse as divine intervention? Or was there indeed some form of external interference, which ancient writers could only interpret in spiritual terms? Some scholars believe the Tower of Babel is actually the story of political collapse. Others think it reflects a cultural rebellion, perhaps multiple tribes rejecting a centralized power. And then, a smaller but intriguing group suggests something more unusual, that the confusion of speech could have been the result of technological interference that ancient people could not comprehend. If the Anunnaki theory is considered, the question becomes, why would an advanced being, or group of beings, want to disrupt human unity? The texts, whether biblical or Sumerian, rarely answer directly. But they do consistently portray the gods as concerned about human ambition, organization, and cooperation. The divine fear of human unity. One of the most striking lines in the Babel story is God's statement. Nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. This line has sparked centuries of debate. It implies potential, capability, and even danger. But danger to whom? To humanity? Or to the heavenly realm? The Anunnaki interpretations take this line in a different direction. Instead of viewing it as divine concern for humanity's moral decline, they view it as a statement of cosmic politics. Human unity may have been seen as a threat, whether to divine hierarchy, to cosmic laws, or to the balance between realms. These interpretations raise questions that cannot be ignored. Did ancient people believe that their gods wanted to limit human technological or spiritual development? Was the story of Babel a coded warning about crossing boundaries? Or was it simply a theological way of explaining why human nations and languages became fragmented? The very ambiguity of the text makes the conversation richer. The parallel Sumerian story, Enki and the Tongues. In the Sumerian myth of Enmakar and the Lord of Aratta, there is a passage that refers to a time when all humans spoke one language. Interestingly, the text describes the god Enki as the one who later changed the speech in their mouths. It is this crossroads, where religion, mythology, and anthropology intersect, that makes the Babel narrative so enticing. Language and the limits of communication with the divine. An intriguing hypothesis arises when considering language in a spiritual context. Did the fragmentation of speech also represent the fragmentation of spiritual connection? In many ancient traditions, divine communication depended on sacred words, chants, or languages. Priests in Sumer, Egypt, and early Israel functioned as linguistic mediators between humans and gods. Different languages meant different rituals, different understandings, and different pathways to the divine. If humanity was once unified, then perhaps divine communication was simpler, more direct, more cohesive. Did the confusion of language make it harder for people to approach the heavens or access forbidden knowledge? Did it limit the potential of humanity to act as a singular force? These are speculative questions, but they invite reflection. The impact of fragmented language on civilizations. When language divides, understanding divides. And when understanding divides, civilizations branch, diverge, and evolve separately. This leads to several lines of inquiry. Did the confusion of languages indirectly lead to the rise of separate nations and empires? Did linguistic fragmentation naturally slow down technological progress, preventing humanity from achieving something too quickly? Could the story reflect a memory of early migrations after a major cultural split? Even scholars who do not take the Babel story literally admit that ancient linguistic fragmentation happened rapidly in some periods. So perhaps the story symbolizes a real historical transformation, exaggerated through myth, but grounded in truth. A question of fear: what did humanity almost achieve? One of the most intriguing elements in the Babel narrative isn't the tower, it is the fear surrounding humanity's capability. What could humans have accomplished if united? Did they risk repeating something from before the flood? Were they uncovering dangerous knowledge? Were they on the verge of reaching the heavens, not metaphorically, but in some physical or technological sense? The biblical text is vague, Sumerian literature hints but does not confirm, and archaeological evidence remains scattered. Yet the very mystery invites deeper examination. The idea that ancient humans could challenge the heavens seems fantastical until we consider how quickly early civilizations developed writing, mathematics, astronomy, and complex architecture. Perhaps the story reflects an early awareness of humanity's potential, which ancient cultures then framed through divine intervention. The story of Babel is more than a tale of a tower, it is a narrative about language, unity, ambition, and a mysterious interruption. Whether the event was divine, political, cultural, or even extraterrestrial in origin, remains an open debate. But one thing is certain. Human language did not diverge gradually and peacefully. Something happened, something disruptive, memorable, and transformative. As we move into Part 5, we will shift focus toward the construction itself, exploring what kind of tower the people were building, how high it could realistically reach, and whether historical ziggurats or lost engineering techniques offer clues to what truly happened at Babel. The tower that reached for heaven, engineering the impossible. Among all the enigmas surrounding the Tower of Babel, one question rises higher than all the rest: what exactly were they building? Was it truly a structure meant to pierce the heavens, or was the description symbolic of humanity's ambition to rise above its earthly limits? And if, as some propose, this tower was not merely an architectural marvel but a technological or spiritual gateway, perhaps even a conduit meant to reach the gods, what kind of knowledge would have been required to construct it? The deeper we go, the more the Tower of Babel seems to straddle two worlds, one of brick, mortar, and ancient engineering, and another of cosmic symbolism, divine intervention, and perhaps even lost technology. A monument in the plain of Shinar. The Bible situates the tower in the plain of Shinar, a region identified with ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. This was the cradle of civilization, where Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian cultures flourished. It was also the land of the ziggurats, those massive temple towers that dotted the Mesopotamian landscape. Ziggurats were no ordinary buildings. Each was designed as a staircase to the heavens, with the temple at its summit believed to be the dwelling place of a god. They were built in layers, with wide bases that narrowed as they rose, each level symbolizing the ascending steps between earth and heaven. So, when Genesis describes a tower with its top in the heavens, the imagery would have been instantly recognizable to ancient listeners. They would not have thought of a sky-piercing skyscraper, but of a monumental ziggurat, an engineered mountain built to connect humans to the divine. But here lies the question: why would the builders of Babel seek to reach heaven unless they believed something tangible awaited them there? Could this phrase have meant more than spiritual aspiration? Could it have been literal, a mission to reach the domain of beings they once believed came down from above? Ziggurats, the stairs of the gods. Archaeologists have long identified one ziggurat in particular as a possible inspiration for the Babel story, the Anunnaki, located in Babylon. Its name in Sumerian means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It was dedicated to Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, but its origins may go back much further, to older Sumerian traditions that linked heaven and earth through sacred architecture. Ancient texts describe these structures as meeting points between gods and men, places where divine beings were to descend to interact with their priests. In essence, the ziggurat was a communications tower, not in the technological sense we think of today, but in the spiritual sense of creating a connection between two realms. So when the people of Babel said, "Let us build a tower to reach the heavens," they were not simply trying to build the tallest monument in the world, they were trying to recreate contact with the gods. Could this have been an attempt to re-establish a connection with the Anunnaki, the ancient beings said to have once walked among them? The Anunnaki and the architecture of ascension. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are often depicted as descending from the heavens to the earth in shining ships or from the sky chamber of the gods. Some interpretations suggest these were symbolic, while others argue they describe literal vehicles, craft that ancient humans witnessed but could not comprehend. If that were the case, it's not unreasonable to imagine that early humans might have tried to recreate a pathway to reach these sky-dwelling beings. Could the Tower of Babel have been a kind of imitation of what the ancients saw, an attempt to build their own stairway to the heavens, perhaps using the limited means and knowledge available to them? If so, the phrase "whose top may reach unto heaven" might not have been poetic, it might have been technical, a record of a physical objective that was perceived as possible. The mystery deepens when we consider how precise Sumerian and Babylonian builders were. Their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and architecture was centuries ahead of its time. They built complex drainage systems, irrigation networks, and temples that aligned perfectly with celestial bodies. Could their understanding of geometry and cosmology have been inherited from divine teachers, as many of their texts claim? And if those teachers were indeed the Anunnaki, could the Tower of Babel have been humanity's effort to reverse the connection, to reach upward to where the gods had once descended? The engineering question: could they have built it? Skeptics often point out that ancient Mesopotamian builders, skilled as they were, could not have built a tower tall enough to literally reach the heavens. After all, their materials, sun-baked bricks and bitumen, had limitations. Yet, this assumption might miss the point. The text does not say they finished the tower. It says that God, or the gods, intervened before the project was completed. Could it be that something about the construction itself triggered this divine, or perhaps extraterrestrial, intervention? Perhaps it wasn't the height of the structure that was dangerous, but the purpose behind it. If the people of Babel were building more than a monument, say, a temple, an energy channel, or even a ritual platform designed to communicate or transport, then the act itself may have been perceived as a violation of divine boundaries. In that light, the confusion of tongues might not have been about language alone, but about disrupting coordination, stopping a collective effort that had become too powerful. The Gate of the Gods. Interestingly, the word Babel comes from the Akkadian Babilu, which literally means Gate of God. Over time, the Hebrew interpretation associated it with Belial, to confuse. But the original meaning, Gate of God, changes everything. If Babel was literally a gateway, could the tower have been viewed not just as a structure, but as a portal, a meeting point or passage between human and divine realms? The ziggurats were believed to be stairways for gods to descend, not for humans to ascend. But what if the builders of Babel reversed that intention? What if they sought to create a man-made mechanism for ascending, to re-enter the divine domain from which they had been barred? This brings us to a fascinating parallel in ancient Sumerian texts. The god Enlil was often portrayed as restrictive and protective of divine domains, while Enki was the giver of knowledge to humanity. Could the Tower of Babel story represent a moment when humans, influenced by Enki's earlier teachings, tried to reclaim that knowledge, to bridge heaven and earth once again? If so, then divine intervention was not about pride alone, it was about containment. Symbolism of the bricks and bitumen. The Bible notes that the builders said, "Let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." In Mesopotamia, this detail is significant. Sun-dried bricks were common, but fired bricks were more durable and advanced, used only for monumental structures. The decision to use fired bricks suggests something extraordinary, a project meant to last forever. Bitumen, too, was more than simple mortar. It was a natural tar-like substance, waterproof and resistant to erosion. Interestingly, bitumen was also used in ancient rituals and even in the mummification process, symbolizing preservation and immortality. Could the use of these materials indicate a symbolic or functional purpose, perhaps a belief that the structure could resist divine destruction, as a kind of countermeasure after the flood? If so, then the builders of Babel were not simply rebels. They were survivors, determined to secure their legacy and avoid another catastrophic intervention from the heavens. Divine intervention or ancient catastrophe. Another layer of the Babel mystery lies in the sudden end of construction. The Bible attributes it to God confusing their speech. But could this confusion have been the result of a real-world event, something so destructive or disorienting that it shattered communication and coordination? Some ancient astronaut theorists propose that a celestial or energetic event, such as a massive storm, explosion, or other natural catastrophe, may have occurred during construction, which later became mythologized as divine interference. Others argue that if the tower was attempting to harness certain forms of energy or cosmic alignment, it might have provoked what ancient peoples perceived as wrath from above. In both interpretations, we see a recurring theme: the moment humanity tried to rise too high, something divine, natural, or otherwise, brought it back down. The legacy of the tower. Even after its fall, the symbolism of the Tower of Babel endured. Every great empire that followed, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, attempted in its own way to recreate the unifying ideal that Babel represented: one empire, one language, one system. Each failed in time. It is as though the lesson of Babel was encoded into history itself: unity, when divorced from divine guidance, leads to collapse. But perhaps that is not the end of the story. Some mystical traditions, especially within ancient Mesopotamian mystery schools and later esoteric philosophies, speak of the tower as not merely a failed structure, but as a metaphor for enlightenment. The ascent of the tower mirrors the ascent of the soul, and the confusion of tongues represents the fragmentation of human consciousness. If the Anunnaki were once humanity's teachers, perhaps the real goal was never to build a physical tower, but to rebuild a spiritual one, a bridge of understanding that reconnects us to the divine source. The Tower of Babel stands at the crossroads of myth, theology, and archaeology. Whether it was a ziggurat, a communication platform, or an attempt to breach the heavens, its builders carried an ambition that still echoes today, the desire to reach beyond human limits. The question that continues to haunt scholars and believers alike is not how high they built, but why. Why did they believe it was possible to reach the realm of the gods? Why did the heavens intervene? And most of all, what were they trying to find up there? In Part 6, we will explore what might have awaited humanity if the tower had been completed, examining the cosmic, spiritual, and even technological dimensions of what reaching heaven might have meant to the ancients, and why that dream was silenced so suddenly. What lay beyond the summit, reaching the realm of the gods? The Tower of Babel is often discussed as though it were merely an ambitious construction project. But when we read the ancient texts closely, and compare the biblical account with Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Babylonian traditions, we begin to see a deeper question emerge. What did humanity believe waited for them at the top of the tower? The phrase "reach unto heaven" may sound mythical, but to the people who built the structure, it had a literal, cultural, and theological meaning. In this part of our exploration, we focus on the destination rather than the tower itself. For the real mystery is not the bricks or the bitumen, it is the ancient understanding of heaven, the gods, and what it meant for humans to approach them. Was the heaven of the Tower of Babel a physical place? A spiritual realm? A forbidden domain? Or something far stranger? Defining heaven in ancient contexts. Modern readers often imagine heaven as a purely spiritual realm. But the ancient Mesopotamians did not see it that way. To them, the heavens were layered. The lower heaven, the sky where birds flew and storms formed. The middle heaven, the celestial realm of planets and stars, objects they tracked with astonishing accuracy. The upper heaven, the divine court where the gods resided. So when ancient texts describe gods descending from heaven, they are not describing vague spiritual movement, they are describing beings coming from the sky, or from a higher realm above the visible sky. In the Sumerian worldview, these beings could move between realms, descending when needed and ascending when their work was done. The question then becomes: did the people of Babel believe they could physically reach this realm by ascending high enough? Or were they trying to create something like a station, gateway, or platform from which communication, or even travel, could occur? A meeting place between two worlds. Ziggurats, the most likely architectural inspiration for the tower, were not meant for humans to climb to heaven, they were meant as landing platforms for gods descending to earth. The top of a ziggurat was called the Holy of Holies, the place where heaven met earth. If the Tower of Babel was conceived as a more ambitious version of these structures, it could have represented a reversal of roles. Instead of the gods coming down, human beings were preparing to go up. This alone would have been perceived as bold, perhaps dangerously bold. In most Mesopotamian myths, bridging the gap between gods and humans required permission. Humanity did not initiate contact. The gods did. So the idea of humans taking the initiative, building a literal or symbolic ladder to the divine realm, might have been viewed as an act of defiance. If the Tower of Babel was a statement, it was this: we no longer need to wait for the gods to return, we will go to them. But what did they expect to find there? The forbidden domain. The aftermath of the Great Flood loomed heavily in ancient memory. Across cultures, there are myths of survivors, humanity reduced to a few, rebuilding from scratch. Many texts, including Sumerian and biblical, imply that something changed after the flood. A boundary had been placed between mankind and the divine. Before the flood, the gods, or the Anunnaki, were said to have walked openly among humans. Men and women lived longer, possessed greater knowledge, and interacted with divine or semi-divine beings. After the flood, lifespans shrank, knowledge faded, and direct contact became rare. So perhaps the Tower of Babel was an attempt to undo the separation placed upon humanity. Could the people of Babel have believed that climbing high enough would allow them to recover the knowledge, wisdom, or power that had been taken away? Some traditions even describe the early generations after the flood as hungry for the lost days when the gods taught mathematics, healing, astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. That longing could easily transform into the ambition to reach heaven, a metaphor for recovering lost instruction. And if the gods truly dwelled somewhere above, or returned there after their time on earth, then perhaps the builders of Babel literally wanted to seek an audience with them. Was heaven a planet or home of the gods? Ancient Mesopotamian cosmology includes another layer, one that complicates the meaning of heaven. The Anunnaki were often associated not just with the sky, but with specific celestial bodies. Some were linked to stars, others to planets. This raises a provocative question. Did ancient people interpret the celestial realm as the homeworld of the gods? If so, then ascending to heaven could reflect an early understanding of space, a longing to reconnect with beings who left, or a symbolic attempt to follow the path of the gods. Many ancient traditions describe gods who ascended to the heavens in fire, returned to the divine ships, or rode the winds into the sky. These may be symbolic descriptions of death, but some scholars argue they may be memories of something technological. If the story of Babel reflects this memory, then perhaps ancient people were trying to recreate not just a tower, but a launch point, a structure that echoed the descent or ascent of the gods. This idea remains speculative, of course. But it raises a powerful question. Why did the heavens respond so severely to a construction project unless it threatened a hidden boundary? The fear of human potential. One of the most puzzling lines in Scripture occurs right before divine intervention. Now nothing they imagine to do will be impossible for them. Why would the heavens fear human unity? What potential did humans possess that could provoke such a response? This statement has generated centuries of debate. Possibilities include: 1. Humans were advancing too rapidly. Early civilizations developed writing, agriculture, mathematics, and architecture with astonishing speed. Could divine beings, or the authors of ancient myth, have seen this as dangerous? 2. Humans were trying to access forbidden knowledge. Many ancient cultures speak of secret knowledge given to humans before the flood that was later taken away. Was Babel an attempt to recover it? 3. Humans sought to breach a cosmic boundary. If the gods had withdrawn to protect humanity from themselves, or to maintain order, then a human attempt to ascend might have threatened that balance. 4. Humans were repeating a pre-flood mistake. The Book of Enoch describes an earlier rebellion where divine watchers descended and gave humanity forbidden knowledge. The flood, in that narrative, was a reset. Perhaps Babel was seen as the beginning of another dangerous ascent. These interpretations differ, but they all point to a common theme. Humanity was reaching for something it was not supposed to touch. What if the tower had been completed? This question has fascinated theologians, historians, and researchers for centuries. The Bible seems to imply a catastrophic possibility had the work continued. Would humans have gained access to divine realms? Would they have unlocked lost knowledge? Would gods and humans have clashed again, leading to another catastrophe? Alternatively, in more symbolic terms, would humanity have achieved a unity so powerful that no divine or earthly force could restrain it? The silence of the text is what makes these questions so tantalizing. But the suddenness of divine intervention implies urgency, as if something catastrophic was about to unfold. Ancient memory or moral lesson? It's possible the story serves as a moral warning against human pride. Yet the emphasis on technology, unity, construction, and divine limits feels too specific, too grounded in historical context, to be merely allegorical. Throughout ancient Mesopotamia, there are stories of humans trying to reach divine realms. Adapa, who refused the food of immortality. Etana, who was taken up by an eagle to the heavens. Gilgamesh, who searched for eternal life. Kings who built temples to summon gods back to earth. The Tower of Babel fits into a much larger pattern, a pattern of human longing to cross the boundary between mortality and divinity. What the Anunnaki interpretations suggest. Those who read the Babel narrative through the lens of ancient astronaut theory propose that reaching heaven meant trying to reach the Anunnaki base of operations. The confusion of languages was a deliberate intervention to stop coordinated technological progress. The destruction of the tower was an act of self-preservation by beings who saw humanity advancing too quickly. The event was a turning point where the gods withdrew further and fractured human unity permanently. Whether one accepts these theories or not, they raise the same question. Were the gods protecting humanity or protecting themselves? The Tower of Babel is not just the story of a tower. It is the story of a boundary, a place where human aspiration collided with divine limitation. Whether one interprets heaven as a spiritual realm, a physical celestial domain, or the home of ancient beings, the result is the same. Humanity reached upward, and something reached back. In Part 7, we will turn our attention to the aftermath of Babel, the dispersion of nations, the birth of diverse cultures, and how this fragmentation shaped the course of ancient history. We will examine whether the sudden spread of languages and peoples aligns with known archaeological timelines, and what ancient texts say about the generations that followed the fall of the tower. The lost engineering. Did the builders of Babel possess forbidden Mesopotamian knowledge? When we imagine the construction of the Tower of Babel, we often picture a large brick pyramid spiraling into the clouds, a symbol of defiance, unity, or ambition. But across the ancient world, monumental structures were rarely just monuments. They were archives of knowledge. They were embodiments of math, astronomy, and sacred geometry. They were built through mastery of materials, measurement, and alignment. They were technological signatures. And so, in this part of the discussion, we must raise a difficult but necessary question: did the builders of Babel possess engineering knowledge that did not belong to ordinary humans of their time? And if so, where did that knowledge come from? To explore this question, we turn again to the mysterious figures that dominate Mesopotamian myth, the Anunnaki. If these beings were considered bringers of knowledge, teachers of agriculture, writing, mathematics, and kingship, could the technology of Babel reflect an attempt to replicate, or surpass, the technologies associated with these gods? The tower as an engineering anomaly. Archaeology shows us that early Mesopotamian cities did indeed build ziggurats, massive stepped structures with religious and astronomical functions. Yet even the largest ziggurats known to history do not match the sheer scale implied in the Babel narrative. The question becomes: did the Babel builders attempt something unprecedented, something that exceeds the known capabilities of their era? When Genesis says, "Let us build a tower whose top may reach unto heaven," was this poetic exaggeration? Or is it echoing an ancient attempt to revive an older engineering tradition, one that humanity once possessed but later lost? We must also ask whether the Babel builders believed they were reconstructing something they had already seen, perhaps the mountains of the gods described in Sumerian texts, the mighty platforms where Anunnaki kings were said to descend from the heavens. Is it possible that the Tower of Babel was not merely a building project, but a reverse engineering project? Clues from Mesopotamian technology. Let us examine what ancient Mesopotamian civilizations actually knew, and what they should not have known at that time unless the knowledge came from external sources. 1. Advanced astronomy. The Sumerians tracked the movements of planets with surprising accuracy. They distinguished Venus's 584-day cycle, recorded lunar nodes, and understood precession-like patterns long before Greek astronomers formalized them. Why did early humans possess such precise cosmic information? Did they learn it from observation, or instruction? If the Tower of Babel was aligned with celestial coordinates, as many scholars suspect, then it required a level of astronomical calculation that doesn't match a supposedly primitive humanity. 2. Sacred geometry. Many ancient structures worldwide, pyramids, ziggurats, megaliths, reveal geometric ratios, the golden ratio, pi-related measurements, and cardinal alignments. These same patterns appear in Mesopotamian temples. How did early humans discover these mathematical constants? Are we witnessing remnants of a lost scientific heritage? 3. Brickmaking technology. Genesis highlights an unusual detail. They had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Why mention this at all? Bitumen, natural asphalt, was an important Mesopotamian material. But the way it is described in the Babel narrative suggests something beyond simple mortar. Some researchers believe bitumen acted as a waterproofing and strengthening agent, creating bricks far more durable than typical mud brick. Was this material knowledge passed down from earlier, non-human builders? And if so, were the Babel builders reviving forgotten techniques once associated with beings like the Anunnaki? 4. Organizational intelligence. The greatest engineering secret is not the material, it is the coordination. Massive labor forces require structured leadership, logistics, food supply chains, distribution of tasks, and architectural planning. Such organization implies either incredibly advanced human social intelligence or knowledge inherited from a superior guiding intelligence. Which fits the Babel story better? The possibility of forbidden knowledge. If God descended to stop the project because nothing will be restrained from them, Genesis 11, what does that imply? Why would language be the barrier he imposed? Why scatter people across the earth? It suggests the builders possessed or were developing knowledge that would unify humanity under a single technological purpose, perhaps a purpose beyond what they were meant to pursue. So we must ask, were the Babel builders accessing knowledge that belonged to the gods, knowledge humanity was not ready for? Ancient traditions often warn of forbidden teachings. The Book of Enoch describes fallen angels teaching metallurgy, magic, and heavenly secrets. The Sumerian myth of Inanna stealing the Me tablets portrays the gods guarding sacred knowledge. Babylonian tales speak of kings punished for learning cosmic mysteries. In all these myths, forbidden wisdom is guarded jealously. And Babel becomes suspiciously similar. A unified humanity attempting to reclaim a higher level of knowledge and being stopped abruptly. Was this because the knowledge they sought was not theirs? Did the Anunnaki fear human advancement? Let us consider the perspective of the gods. If the Anunnaki were real beings, powerful, technologically superior, ruling over early humanity, what would they think of humans building a tower reaching for the heavens? Would they see humanity imitating them? Challenging them? Closing the gap between mortal and divine? Many myths paint the Anunnaki as divided, not unlike the gods of Olympus. Some favor humanity, others oppose it. If the Tower of Babel project threatened the balance of power, could the confusion of languages represent a divine intervention to prevent human ascension? Could the gods themselves, possibly the Anunnaki, have sabotaged the project? It is curious that many Mesopotamian myths refer to the gods confusing human speech long before the biblical account. One Sumerian text describes Enki deliberately altering human language to prevent them from forming alliances. If this is true, then the confusion of tongues is not just a biblical motif, it is a Mesopotamian one. Did the Hebrew authors preserve an older memory? A forgotten master plan? If we view the Tower of Babel as a revival of the antediluvian, pre-flood world, the pieces begin to align. Consider these questions. Did Noah and his family carry memories of the pre-flood world? Did their descendants attempt to rebuild what was once lost? Could the knowledge of pre-flood architecture, perhaps guided by beings like the Anunnaki, have survived through oral traditions? Many legends suggest the pre-flood world had advanced technology, unusual knowledge, and tall majestic structures. If Nimrod, the supposed leader behind Babel, had access to fragments of this older wisdom, he may have attempted to resurrect it. Was Babel an attempt to rebuild the mountain of the gods, the place where divine beings once descended? Was it a symbolic stairway, like the Mesopotamian ziggurats known as Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth? The very name suggests a point of connection between earth and sky. Was Babel intended to be that bridge? Why the project had to be stopped? Let us imagine the perspective of the divine once more. A unified humanity mastering advanced engineering and astronomical knowledge, building a structure designed to reach the heavens, might represent the beginning of a new age. But if the intent was corrupted, not seeking unity with God, but seeking to ascend to the realm of the gods, perhaps to challenge them, then the project becomes dangerous. Was the Tower of Babel less about technology and more about intent? Were humans trying to reclaim a path that had once belonged exclusively to the gods? Could the tower, if completed, become a launch platform? A communication beacon? A symbolic act of rebellion? Or a way to open a portal to the realm of the divine? Such possibilities sound speculative, yet ancient myths consistently describe connections between earth and heaven facilitated by the gods. If humanity tried to mimic such technology, would the gods intervene? An echo across civilizations. What makes the Babel story so mysterious is how many cultures share similar myths. The Maya speak of a tall tower destroyed by gods, causing language confusion. The Aztecs recount a giant ladder to the sky ruined by divine command. Assam tribes describe a unified people whose languages were scrambled by the Creator after building a magnificent tower. Sumerian tablets refer to Enki disrupting human speech. Babylonian myths echo a divine sabotage of a great ziggurat. Why do so many civilizations remember the same event? Did they all witness a catastrophic end to a great human engineering achievement? Why does language confusion appear in so many traditions? Was this memory so traumatic and so universal that it survived thousands of years? Having explored the architectural, technological, and mythological dimensions, we return to the central question of this part. Did the Tower of Babel reflect forbidden or lost engineering knowledge, possibly inherited from the Anunnaki or the pre-flood world? The evidence does not give us certainty, but it gives us enough to continue the discussion. The builders possessed advanced knowledge for their era. Their project resembled divine structures described in ancient texts. The gods, whether biblical or Anunnaki, intervened. The knowledge may have been inherited from an earlier age. The event left a universal memory across global cultures. So perhaps the Tower of Babel was not merely a tower, but an attempt to reclaim a divine legacy, a technological heritage once given to mankind and later taken away. In the next section, we will explore Part 8, the Heavenly Gate. Was the Tower of Babel designed as a portal, stargate, or cosmic connection to the Anunnaki realm? The Heavenly Gate. Was the Tower of Babel a portal, stargate, or divine communication system? Every ancient civilization seemed obsessed with one idea, the boundary between Earth and the heavens. Whether this heaven was the sky, outer space, or a spiritual dimension depends on the interpretation. But one thing is clear, ancient peoples believed that the realms of gods and humans were not entirely separate. There were bridges, ladders, gates, and portals. And when we turn to the Tower of Babel, a striking question arises. Was the tower truly meant to reach the heavens, or was it designed to connect heaven and earth in a very literal, technological sense? This part of the discussion examines that question. Was the Tower of Babel an early attempt at a divine communication system? A portal? A stargate? Or the recreation of Anunnaki architecture designed to allow contact between worlds? Let us explore the clues. 1. The meaning behind the name Babel. The word Babel in Hebrew is associated with confusion, yet in Akkadian, the language of ancient Babylon, Babili means gate of the gods. A gate is not just a doorway, it is a controlled access point. So we must ask, why did ancient Babylonians call their greatest temples the gates of the gods? Did they believe the gods physically used these structures to descend or ascend? Could the Tower of Babel, then, be more than a religious monument? In Mesopotamian theology, the ziggurat was the physical bridge between the divine and human worlds. At its top was a shrine where gods were believed to appear. So Babel's builders were not constructing a building for humans to climb. They were building a landing platform for the gods. And if the Anunnaki were real beings who came from the heavens, then a gate would be a technological interface, not merely a spiritual symbol. 2. The Anunnaki and the descent motif. Mesopotamian texts frequently mention the gods descending in brilliance or in their chariots of heaven. While scholars interpret these as mythical images, some researchers suggest these descriptions resemble technological arrival rather than poetic metaphor. If the gods descended from the sky, whether from another dimension, planet, or region, how did they arrive? Could ziggurats have served as markers, navigational beacons, or even controlled descent platforms? If so, then the Tower of Babel might have been humanity's attempt to replicate the landing structures used by divine beings. Let us ask, were humans trying to call the gods back? Or perhaps worse, were they trying to go up to the realm of the gods without permission? 3. Babel as a communication beacon. In the ancient world, high structures were often associated with communication. Even in the modern era, the tallest buildings serve as towers for broadcasting and receiving signals. If the Tower of Babel was extraordinarily tall enough to be unprecedented, could its height relate to communication? Let's explore several possibilities. A. An astronomical observation platform. The higher one goes, the clearer the horizon. Such a tower could track stars, planets, conjunctions, and divine signs. But why would God be concerned enough to intervene? Astronomy alone is not a threat. B. A ritual invitation to the gods. Ziggurats were already built for gods to descend, but Babel's scale suggests something more ambitious, perhaps a ritual or event meant to summon the Anunnaki. Could humanity have been attempting to reopen a closed channel of communication? C. A technological beacon. If the builders had inherited fragments of pre-flood knowledge, possibly involving energy, sound, or astronomical alignment, the tower might have been designed as a literal transmitter. Sound, vibration, and frequency were considered sacred in Mesopotamian ritual. Temples were built to resonate. Ziggurats were aligned with celestial bodies. Is it possible the Tower of Babel was a device rather than a monument? Something that emitted a signal? Something that reached the heavens and not by physical height, but by energetic or communicative function. 4. Stargate theory, a portal between worlds. Some researchers propose that ancient temples were portals, not metaphorically, but technologically. If the Anunnaki were extra-dimensional or extraplanetary, they may have traveled via gateways rather than spacecraft. Let us examine the possibility carefully. Evidence from ancient texts. Sumerian tablets describe gods traveling through doors of heaven. The Epic of Gilgamesh refers to gates guarded by scorpion men that lead to the realm of the gods. Inanna's descent narrative mentions the gates of the underworld, each controlled by ritual protocol. The Enuma Elish speaks of divine stations in the sky assigned to gods. None of these sound like simple doorways. They resemble controlled access points, a hallmark of portal technology. If the gods used portals, could humans try to build one? If the Tower of Babel was patterned after divine architecture, then the project may have been more than symbolic. It may have been an attempt to artificially create a gate of the gods without divine authorization. And if the portal metaphor is valid, the divine intervention makes more sense. Scattering humanity prevents unified energy and focus. Confusing languages disrupts the precision needed to align structures or recite rituals. Stopping construction physically prevents the formation of the gateway. Thus, God, or the Anunnaki, depending on interpretation, may have prevented humanity from opening a cosmic door. 5. Why did the divine realm respond so strongly? Let us return to Genesis 11. Now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. This is not a warning about height. It is a warning about capability. What were humans imagining? What were they approaching? What technology or knowledge were they reviving? If they were constructing a gigantic stairway to heaven, the punishment seems severe. But if they were attempting to access forbidden domains, contact divine beings directly, harness cosmic energy, or re-establish pre-flood intimacy with supernatural entities, then the intervention becomes understandable. The question is, why wasn't humanity allowed to do this? Possibly because the project bypassed divine authority. The knowledge was dangerous without guidance. The gods or God feared human misuse. The portal could unleash unintended consequences. Or humanity was not spiritually or morally ready. Thus, confusion of languages becomes a protective act, not just punishment. 6. The problem of unity. Human unity is often celebrated, yet at Babel, unity is viewed as dangerous. Why? Unity allows collective intelligence. Collective intelligence enables rediscovery of lost knowledge. Lost knowledge may include cosmic or divine technology. In other words, unity was not the enemy. What unity could achieve was the enemy. What if the fear was that humanity would surpass its boundaries? What if the tower could indeed open a pathway to the divine realm? This raises another question. Did someone, perhaps Nimrod, intend to use the tower for control? If the tower functioned as a divine gate, whoever controlled it controlled access to the gods. This would create a dangerous power imbalance. 7. Was Babel an attempt to reach the Anunnaki homeworld? The ancient Mesopotamians believed the Anunnaki came from another realm, sometimes interpreted as a distant planet, sometimes as the heavenly regions. If humans believed they could reach that realm physically or energetically, then Babel represents humanity's attempt to cross the boundary that separates gods from mortals. But could the tower literally take humans to the Anunnaki? For this to be true, the builders would need advanced astronomical understanding, geometric precision, knowledge of energy or resonance, and belief that ascension was possible. We have already discussed evidence that ancient humanity possessed surprising astronomical and mathematical knowledge. If the builders were using this knowledge to align the tower with specific stars, with planetary movements, or with the path of the gods, then perhaps Babel was intended as a cosmic ladder, not made of physical steps, but harmonic resonance. This echoes Jacob's ladder, a later biblical vision of angels ascending and descending a heavenly gateway. Could Babel have been a man-made version of that divine structure? 8. The Mesopotamian blueprint. Archaeologists have identified the ziggurat of Anunnaki in Babylon as a probable inspiration behind the later biblical account. Its name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. A foundation is a link point, a connection between realms. Ziggurat tops often contained a special room called a bit akitu, a chamber where the god was believed to appear during certain festivals. What technology, if any, did these chambers contain? Researchers speculate. Vibrational resonance chambers, astronomical observatories, alignment structures, ritual frequency generators, or simply symbolic spaces. But what if these chambers originally served a completely different purpose, one forgotten by later generations? Could Babel have attempted to recreate a chamber used by the Anunnaki to transition between realms? If the builders copied an older, divine blueprint, perhaps unknowingly, the tower may have been more dangerous than they realized. 9. The hand of God or the hand of the gods. The intervention at Babel is traditionally attributed to God, but what if the story preserves a memory of multiple divine beings acting together, just as the Anunnaki did in Sumerian myths? Genesis uses the phrase, "Let us go down." Who is thus? This is one of the oldest debates in theology. But if the text preserves an echo of earlier sources, it may refer to a council, possibly the same divine council found in Sumerian tablets, the Ugaritic texts, the Book of Enoch, and even Psalm 82. If the confusion of languages mirrors Enki's earlier act of altering human speech in Mesopotamian myths, then perhaps the biblical authors absorbed a much older story. The day the gods descended and shut down a human attempt to breach their domain. 10. What does reaching the heavens really mean? If the heavens are simply the sky, the tower would need to reach physically into the atmosphere, impossible with ancient materials. But if heavens refers to the realm of the gods, the abode of the Anunnaki, a spiritual or extra-dimensional plane, or a cosmic frequency band, then reaching the heavens takes on a new meaning. Could the tower have been designed to amplify consciousness, create a resonant field, channel cosmic energy, or open a dimensional doorway? If so, the height is symbolic, the true function lies in geometry and alignment. This aligns with the mystery of pyramids, Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, and other ancient structures believed to have energetic or astronomical functions. Was Babel one of these? 11. The forbidden technology hypothesis. Ancient traditions often speak of knowledge once possessed by humanity but later taken away. Sumerian myths speak of the Me tablets, divine databanks. Enoch's writings mention heavenly secrets taught by fallen angels. Greek myths describe mankind losing access to divine fire. Biblical accounts repeatedly show God restricting divine knowledge. What if Babel was the last great attempt to reclaim forbidden technology? What if the original purpose of ziggurats was not ceremonial, but technological, and the true meaning was forgotten? If the Tower of Babel was humanity's attempt to revive, replicate, or reverse engineer a divine device, then the catastrophic intervention makes sense. And perhaps this event is why the ancient world later viewed the gods as distant. So we ask, was the Tower of Babel a divine gate, a portal or stargate designed to connect humanity with the realm of the Anunnaki? We cannot answer definitively. But the clues are provocative. The name Gate of the Gods. The divine descent to stop the project. The alignment with ancient portal myths. The global memory of tower destruction. The fear of human ascension or communication. The similarity to structures associated with divine travel. The Tower of Babel might not have been a ladder to heaven. It may have been a key. A doorway. A technology. A powerful bridge humanity was not meant, or not ready, to activate. The aftermath, dispersion, language, and the shaping of civilizations. The story of the Tower of Babel does not end with the destruction of the structure. In fact, the collapse of the tower, the confusion of languages, and the dispersion of humanity may have been even more consequential than the tower itself. Part 9 examines the aftermath, the scattering of peoples, the creation of languages, and the rise of civilizations. But we must also ask deeper questions. Was this dispersion purely divine punishment, or did it serve another purpose? Did the Anunnaki or divine powers intentionally fragment humanity to prevent the recurrence of dangerous knowledge? 1. Confusion of tongues, a linguistic catastrophe. Genesis 11 verses 7-9 states, "Come, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." Language is not merely a tool for communication, it is a vehicle for culture, thought, and collaboration. By confusing the tongues of humanity, humans could no longer coordinate massive projects. Knowledge sharing became fragmented. Collective ambition was interrupted. But why language? Why not scatter people immediately or destroy the tower outright? Language as a control mechanism, humans could still survive physically, but their potential to unite technologically or spiritually was limited. Preservation of independence. By scattering, humanity could continue to develop, but without reaching a dangerous level of collective power. Some researchers suggest that language itself encodes thought patterns. By fragmenting language, the divine or the gods were not just preventing cooperation, they were reshaping human cognition. Could this be the true reason that the Gate of the Gods could not be completed? Not the physical tower, but the human mind itself? 2. The scattering of peoples. After the confusion of languages, Genesis 11 says that humanity was dispersed across the face of the earth. From a practical standpoint, the unity of Babel made large-scale construction feasible. Once language and culture fragmented, coordinated labor on such a scale became impossible. From a mythological or theological standpoint, this dispersion may have been necessary to prevent repeated attempts to reach the divine realm. The scattering also led to the diversification of civilizations, languages, and cultures, a process still visible today. Interestingly, this dispersion correlates with early archaeological evidence. Mesopotamia's cities emerged in relative proximity, yet distinct languages and city-states formed. By the 2nd millennium BCE, Babylonian, Sumerian, Akkadian, and Elamite cultures already exhibit unique scripts and languages. Could this reflect a historical memory of Babel's aftermath, a sudden separation of peoples who once spoke the same tongue? 3. Unity as a threat. The Babel narrative emphasizes that human unity had reached a point where nothing they imagined to do will be impossible. This is remarkable. Humanity's potential to achieve technological, spiritual, or cosmic milestones appears to have been recognized as a danger. Unity allowed knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and mathematics to be applied on a global scale. Unity allowed the rebuilding of pre-flood technologies. Unity may have allowed humans to attempt direct contact with divine or Anunnaki realms. By scattering humanity, divine or extraterrestrial forces ensured that knowledge, technology, and ambition were distributed and slowed. 4. Cultural fragmentation and the birth of civilizations. Paradoxically, the dispersion that followed Babel laid the foundations for diverse civilizations. When humans separated geographically, distinct languages emerged. Independent cultures developed. Unique approaches to agriculture, architecture, governance, and religion were tested in isolation. While the original goal, to reach the heavens, was thwarted, the dispersion may have created resilience in human civilization. Knowledge was not centralized and therefore not as easily misused, but it also survived and evolved in multiple ways. Could this have been an intentional design, a safeguard that prevented humanity from repeating the same dangerous ambition too quickly? 5. Traces of Babel across cultures. Even after dispersion, the story of a great tower or unified humanity survives across global myths. Mesopotamia, the ziggurats themselves, with their layers and shrines, echo the structure of Babel. Mesoamerica, the Aztec and Maya myths speak of towers and stairways to heaven that were destroyed or sabotaged. India, the Sanskrit texts describe the ascent to the gods' realm and the fragmentation of humans due to divine intervention. Europe, the Greek myth of the Titans' rebellion and the punishment of humans mirrors the idea of overreaching and divine correction. These stories suggest that the memory of Babel, or at least the memory of a catastrophic attempt to breach the divine realm, was shared across continents, possibly as a warning encoded in cultural memory. 6. Language as a barrier to knowledge. If the Tower of Babel had succeeded, humanity may have retained a unified body of knowledge, from engineering and astronomy to spiritual communication. Once tongues were confused, knowledge was compartmentalized. Skills developed independently, often lost or reinvented. Civilization evolved more slowly, yet more safely, in the eyes of divine or extraterrestrial overseers. Some theorists argue that this is why ancient civilizations show sudden leaps in knowledge separated by centuries or millennia. Advanced astronomical calculations in Sumeria. Pyramidal construction in Egypt. Megalithic structures in Malta and Britain. Fragmented knowledge forced localized rediscovery, rather than collective mastery, a deliberate break on human potential. 7. The role of the Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were the gods referenced in the Mesopotamian account, the Babel event may have served multiple purposes. Prevent human rebellion against divine authority. Protect sacred knowledge from misuse. Enforce cosmic order by limiting the unification of human civilization. Preserve the timeline of interaction between humans and the Anunnaki, ensuring humanity remained dependent on divine guidance. This also explains the precision of intervention. Language confusion is subtle, not destructive. Humans survive and continue to thrive. Civilization continues, but the knowledge barrier remains intact. 8. The legacy of Babel in human consciousness. Despite the dispersion and confusion, humanity retained memory of the tower and its ambition. Awareness of the heavens as a place of power. Reverence and fear of the divine realm. Could this collective memory have influenced later spiritual systems, like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and eventually Christianity? Mythical concepts of ascension, stargates, and celestial stairways? The human drive to explore the unknown, from architecture to space travel? Even millennia later, humanity continues to reach for the sky, to unify knowledge, and to strive for what once may have been a forbidden. 9. The fragmentation of knowledge and human innovation. Interestingly, the post-Babel world shows a pattern. Knowledge spreads slowly and unevenly. Innovation is often rediscovered independently in different regions. Great civilizations achieve brilliance, but rarely share breakthroughs globally until much later. This is consistent with the idea that humanity was divided intentionally, not as punishment alone, but to control progress and prevent repetition of potentially dangerous endeavors. In this light, Babel's destruction becomes less a story of divine wrath and more a story of cosmic intervention for survival and order. 10. Humanity's ongoing relationship with the divine or extraterrestrial. After Babel, humans continued to build towers, temples, and observatories. Ziggurats, pyramids, and megalithic structures. Rituals intended to communicate with the heavens. Even scattered and linguistically divided, the instinct to bridge the mortal and divine persisted. This persistence suggests humanity retained fragments of pre-Babel ambition. The knowledge and techniques were partially preserved. The story of Babel served as both caution and inspiration. In other words, the human drive to reach the gods was not extinguished, it was redirected, slower and more cautious, across dispersed civilizations. 11. Key questions for reflection. The aftermath of Babel raises several unresolved questions. Was the dispersion purely divine punishment, or a strategic containment of knowledge and ambition? Did the confusion of languages truly prevent humans from completing the tower, or did it prevent them from fully understanding the cosmic technology? Were the Anunnaki involved in the intervention, preserving their authority and secrecy? How did this fragmentation shape human history, socially, technologically, and spiritually? Could the stories across multiple cultures represent a global memory of the same event? These questions point to a central truth: Babel was not merely an architectural or linguistic event. It reshaped human civilization, altered the trajectory of technology, and created patterns that persist to this day. The collapse of the Tower of Babel and the resulting dispersion of humanity may have been as impactful as the attempted construction itself. Language became a barrier, unity was fractured, and civilization was forced into isolated development. Yet this fragmentation may have also preserved humanity, preventing the misuse of advanced knowledge and maintaining a balance between mortal ambition and divine or cosmic order. In Part 10, we will explore the tantalizing possibility of hidden remnants of the tower's technology or design in ancient structures and myths, and whether humanity may one day attempt to reconstruct what was lost, intentionally or accidentally, as it reaches again for the heavens. Hidden remnants, traces of the tower's technology and knowledge. By the time we reach Part 10 of our exploration, a compelling question emerges: did anything survive from the Tower of Babel? Beyond the story, the language confusion, and the dispersion of peoples, is it possible that fragments of its technology, engineering, or cosmic knowledge persisted in ancient structures, myths, and rituals? And if so, could humanity, consciously or unconsciously, be attempting to reconstruct what was once lost? In this part, we examine evidence from archaeology, mythology, and comparative ancient architecture, raising provocative questions about continuity, memory, and hidden knowledge. 1. The ziggurats, architectural echoes of Babel. Mesopotamia provides the most direct physical evidence for Babel-like structures, the ziggurats. These were monumental step pyramids, with temples at the top serving as shrines or ceremonial platforms. Anunnaki. Many scholars identify the ziggurat of Babylon, Anunnaki, as the historical inspiration for Babel. Its name, House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, implies a connection between Earth and the divine realm, a foundation replicating cosmic order, an intentional alignment with celestial phenomena. If Babel's builders intended to reach or communicate with the heavens, Anunnaki may have preserved a fragment of the original blueprint. Question: did Anunnaki retain actual functional elements, geometric or astronomical alignments, capable of mimicking some aspects of the tower's intended purpose? 2. Astronomical and geometric knowledge. Ancient civilizations frequently aligned their monumental structures with celestial events. Could this be a vestige of tower knowledge? The ziggurat's levels correspond to planets in the Sumerian cosmology. Many temples were oriented to solstices, equinoxes, or lunar cycles. The pyramids of Egypt, built centuries later, also exhibit precise cardinal alignments. Such precision raises questions. Was this purely symbolic, or a form of functional communication with the heavens? Could the tower have incorporated mechanisms or geometries intended to reach or signal divine realms? Some theorists suggest that these alignments may have been inherited from pre-flood or early post-flood knowledge, a fragment of the tower's original design encoded into later civilizations. 3. The role of ritual in preserving knowledge. Ancient rituals often accompanied monumental construction. Incantations, chants, and sacred songs were performed. Specific numbers and sequences were recited repeatedly. Ceremonial timing corresponded to astronomical events. Why? Some researchers argue these were not mere religious acts, but codified methods to activate or stabilize structures. In other words, rituals may have been necessary to tune the tower or ziggurat. Spoken language, numbers, and alignment may have been integral to activating latent technology. Disruption of language, as at Babel, would prevent activation. This raises an intriguing possibility: Babel's confusion of tongues may have been both spiritual and technological. Fragmented languages would disrupt human ability to correctly replicate rituals or sequences. The tower could not function as a gate, beacon, or portal without precise linguistic and mathematical coherence. 4. Myths as memory of technology. Across cultures, myths preserve echoes of Babel-like events. Mesopotamian texts, the gods intervened to prevent humans from building a divine structure. Egyptian myths, pharaonic pyramids are associated with ascension, resurrection, and alignment with stars. Greek myths, Icarus, Daedalus, and the Tower of the Winds highlight hubris and forbidden technology. Mesoamerican texts, Great pyramids and temples symbolize mountains reaching the sky, occasionally destroyed by gods or cosmic events. While mythology is symbolic, the recurring pattern suggests a shared memory of advanced knowledge or technology that humans were once able to access, perhaps fragmentary knowledge inherited from Babel. 5. Hidden technologies in ancient architecture. If the Tower of Babel incorporated advanced design or technology, could remnants appear in later structures? Step pyramids echo the tiered design of ziggurats. Each level could represent an energetic or ritual layer. Alignment with stars, structures may be tuned to specific constellations or cycles, suggesting celestial communication. Acoustic chambers, some temples and pyramids feature resonance chambers that amplify sound. Could these be remnants of vibrational technology used at Babel? Mathematical ratios, golden ratio, pi, and geometric precision appear in temples and pyramids worldwide. Was this practical engineering, spiritual symbolism, or encoded knowledge? 6. The concept of the Stargate revisited. Earlier we proposed that the tower may have functioned as a portal. Could fragments of this concept persist? Certain ancient structures appear to be aligned with energy fields or cosmic phenomena. Myths describe gods descending or ascending through gates or stairways. Ancient texts emphasize precision in rituals to open or maintain access. If the Tower of Babel was intended as a gateway, it may be the archetype for all subsequent sacred architecture, physical structures designed to bridge the mortal and divine, even if the true functionality was forgotten. 7. The scattered knowledge hypothesis. After Babel, humanity was dispersed, languages were confused, and collective knowledge was fractured. This may explain independent discovery of similar architectural and astronomical principles in distant civilizations. Recurrent symbols, numbers, and sacred geometries across cultures. Sudden leaps of technological and astronomical insight separated by centuries. In other words, fragments of Babel's design and knowledge were scattered across the globe, waiting to be rediscovered, sometimes deliberately, sometimes unconsciously. 8. Evidence from later texts. Some ancient texts hint at surviving fragments of tower knowledge. The Book of Enoch references knowledge of celestial mechanics and gates of heaven. Apocryphal Babylonian texts describe rituals to contact the divine using tall structures. Hermetic and Greek sources allude to ancient technology that manipulates energy and matter. These suggest that the Tower of Babel may have represented a repository of knowledge, partially encoded in architecture, ritual, and myth, knowledge humans were forbidden to fully access. 9. Could humanity reconstruct the tower today? Modern scholars, engineers, and archaeologists may attempt to reconstruct ancient structures. But if the tower incorporated knowledge lost after Babel, replication may fail due to missing linguistic or ritual components. Precise alignment and sequences may be required to activate intended effects. Reconstruction without full understanding could be ineffective, or even dangerous, according to myth. This raises a provocative idea. Humanity may be attempting, consciously or unconsciously, to reconstruct what Babel represented, even in modern technology, architecture, or space exploration. Some see echoes in space launch programs aiming to reach orbit or other planets. Megastructures aligned with celestial phenomena. Advanced sound or resonance technologies. Religious architecture designed to inspire unity and transcendence. Could these be symbolic attempts to complete what Babel started? 10. Lessons from the Tower. What can we learn from Babel, even millennia later? Unity and ambition are powerful forces, capable of achieving extraordinary feats, but potentially dangerous if unchecked. Knowledge may be limited by intention and discipline. The builders sought access to divine realms but lacked authority, wisdom, or moral alignment. Physical structures may encode hidden principles, architecture, geometry, and ritual may combine to create functionality beyond ordinary perception. Fragmentation can be protective, scattering humans and confusing language slowed progress but preserved humanity's survival. Babel is both a cautionary tale and a blueprint for potential. It demonstrates humanity's desire to reach the divine, the consequences of overreach, and the possibility of hidden knowledge lying dormant. 1. As we approach the conclusion, we must ask: how much of Babel's original design or technology was lost versus encoded in later ziggurats, pyramids, and temples? Are myths and rituals the true carriers of this knowledge? Was Babel a failed attempt at cosmic contact, or an intentional limitation imposed to protect humanity? Could humanity, in the future, reconstruct what was lost, and should it? The Tower of Babel remains an enigmatic event, part history, part myth, and part memory of something far greater than a mere building. The enduring legacy, Babel's lessons for humanity. As we reach the final part of this exploration, the story of the Tower of Babel is no longer simply a tale of ambition, confusion, or divine punishment. Through our discussion, it emerges as a multifaceted event, an attempt to access knowledge lost after the flood, a potentially advanced technological project, a moment of collective human ambition curtailed, and a foundational myth that influenced civilizations for millennia. But the question remains: what is the enduring legacy of Babel? And what does it reveal about humanity's quest for the heavens, knowledge, and unity? 1. Babel as a mirror of human ambition. At its core, the Tower of Babel reflects humanity's innate drive to reach beyond limitations. The builders sought to unify their people, consolidate knowledge, and bridge the gap between earth and heaven. This ambition embodies a paradox. Ambition drives progress, innovation, and exploration. Ambition unchecked may provoke catastrophe or moral collapse. By examining Babel, we see that ambition itself is not inherently wrong, rather, it is the use and purpose of knowledge that determines whether it is constructive or dangerous. The builders aim to reach the heavens, perhaps to contact the Anunnaki or divine realms, illustrates a universal theme, the desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. This desire persists across cultures, religions, and eras. 2. Language, knowledge, and human fragmentation. The divine act of confusing human language had profound consequences. It prevented unified access to knowledge that may have been too advanced for early humanity. It forced human ingenuity to develop independently across dispersed civilizations. It preserved humanity from potential self-destruction while maintaining the capacity for future rediscovery. Paradoxically, the scattering of people and languages preserved knowledge by decentralizing it. Instead of a single catastrophic hub of dangerous understanding, wisdom was spread, tested, and diversified. Many modern scholars and theorists suggest that the fragmentation caused by Babel shaped the course of human development, socially, linguistically, technologically, and spiritually. 3. The Tower's technological and cosmic implications. If we entertain the possibility that Babel was more than a symbolic structure, perhaps a cosmic gateway, a stargate, or an advanced energy transmitter, then the story has implications far beyond mere construction. Humanity may have been attempting to interface with extraterrestrial or divine technology. Ritual, geometry, alignment, and language were essential to activating the Tower's potential. Divine intervention, or intervention by the Anunnaki, suggests that access to such technology was tightly controlled. The repeated echoes of this story in ziggurats, pyramids, and ancient temples worldwide hint that fragments of Babel's original knowledge persisted. Architecture, alignment, and ritual may encode methods of interacting with the cosmos that we are only beginning to understand. 4. Babel and global mythology. The influence of Babel extends far beyond Mesopotamia. The biblical account inspired later Abrahamic traditions. Similar myths exist across the globe, from Mesoamerica to India, from Greece to Europe, reflecting a shared memory of a cataclysmic event tied to human ambition and divine intervention. Archetypes of ascent, divine gates, cosmic stairways, and linguistic fragmentation appear repeatedly in human storytelling. This suggests that Babel was not merely a localized story but a cultural and psychological milestone for early human civilization, encoding both memory and warning for generations. 5. The ethical dimensions of knowledge. One of the enduring questions of Babel concerns who is entitled to knowledge and how it should be used. The builders were highly capable, organized, and ambitious, yet they were prevented from accessing or completing their project. This raises modern parallels. What knowledge today is powerful but dangerous if misused? How should humanity approach technologies that could alter consciousness, biology, or access new realms? Can ambition coexist with responsibility? Babel reminds us that ethical considerations are inseparable from knowledge. Access alone is not sufficient, intention, morality, and wisdom are equally critical. 6. The tower as a symbol of unity and division. The tower's construction illustrates both the power and vulnerability of human unity. United, humanity was capable of astonishing feats, potentially even reaching divine realms. Unified ambition without moral guidance may provoke divine or natural correction. Division, while frustrating, also preserves the species by dispersing knowledge, resources, and risk. This duality, the interplay of unity and fragmentation, continues to shape human societies. Cooperation drives progress, yet decentralization preserves resilience. 7. The Tower and the Quest for Transcendence. From an esoteric perspective, Babel symbolizes humanity's ongoing quest for transcendence. The heavens may represent not only physical elevation but spiritual, intellectual, or cosmic aspiration. The tower embodies humanity's desire to reach higher states of consciousness or understanding. Confusion of language, dispersion, and subsequent cultural evolution did not eliminate this drive, it redirected it into diverse traditions, sciences, and philosophies. In modern terms, the quest continues in space exploration, quantum physics, artificial intelligence, meditation and spiritual practices. All are attempts, in one form or another, to bridge the gap between humanity and higher knowledge, echoing the ambitions of Babel's builders. 8. Lessons for modern civilization. Babel's story provides lessons for contemporary humanity. Ambition must be tempered by wisdom, knowledge without guidance may be dangerous. Unity is powerful but risky, collective projects can achieve unprecedented outcomes but require ethical frameworks. Preservation of knowledge is essential, fragmentation may slow progress but also safeguards humanity. Ethics and intention are central to progress, technology, science, and spiritual exploration are only as safe as the wisdom guiding them. History preserves memory as guidance, ancient myths, structures, and rituals encode lessons that remain relevant today. 9. Could humanity rebuild the tower? In a literal sense, reconstructing Babel is technically impossible with ancient methods. But in a symbolic or metaphorical sense, humanity continues to reach for the heavens through rockets, satellites, and interstellar ambitions. Digital networks, global communication, and shared knowledge could represent a new tower of unity and understanding. The challenge remains, can humanity unify responsibly without repeating the mistakes of Babel? This suggests that the tower is not merely historical, it is a living metaphor for ambition, knowledge, and the limits of human aspiration. 10. The Tower of Babel and the Anunnaki connection. If the builders sought to reach the Anunnaki or a divine realm, the narrative underscores a persistent theme: interaction with higher intelligence is fraught with consequences. The Anunnaki may have been portrayed as gatekeepers, maintaining cosmic order. Human attempts to reach them without preparation or guidance were thwarted. The story reflects the delicate balance between curiosity, ambition, and cosmic laws, whether divine or extraterrestrial. Even today, humanity continues to explore realms beyond immediate comprehension, from deep space to quantum realms, echoing the ancient drive that Babel represents. The Tower of Babel remains one of humanity's most enduring symbols. It represents ambition and creativity, the dangers and rewards of unified knowledge, the consequences of overreach, the scattering of cultures, languages, and ideas. Humanity's ongoing quest to transcend earthly limits. It is a story that bridges history, mythology, theology, and speculative technology. It warns, inspires, and challenges us to reflect on the ethical and spiritual dimensions of our pursuit of knowledge. In the end, Babel's legacy is not the fallen tower, but the enduring human desire to reach for the heavens, responsibly, wisely, and ethically. The lessons of Babel are as relevant now as they were millennia ago, reminding us that ambition, knowledge, and morality must travel together if humanity is to truly ascend.